I should have known the evening would turn sour the moment I walked into that restaurant. The air smelled of garlic butter and charred steak, the kind of place where laughter carried too easily across crowded tables. My husband held the door open for me, but he did not say a word. He knew the history. He knew how dinners with his family usually ended. I kept telling myself it would be different this time. Maybe they would smile at me without a hidden edge. Maybe my mother-in-law would treat me like someone who belonged. The hostess led us to the long table near the window where his family had already gathered. The chatter was loud, overlapping, full of the energy of people who believed they were the center of the room. My eyes scanned quickly, counting seats. There was one open chair near the end, not really with the group, but not far enough away to be ignored. I thought perhaps it was for me. But then she saw me. My mother-in-law's lipstick was a shade too bright, her laugh too sharp. She leaned slightly toward the others, tilting her head in mock sweetness. "We'll put you with the kids' table," she said, her tone both playful and cruel. The people around her laughed, not loudly, but enough. Enough to let me know the jab landed. I nodded. Just a small movement of my head, my lips pressing into the faintest smile. I knew better than to give her the reaction she wanted. But inside, I felt the familiar sting. The room tilted for a moment, the edges of my vision going fuzzy. It was not the first time she had found a way to humiliate me in front of everyone. It was simply the most direct. I sat at the edge anyway, not at the children's table exactly, but close enough that her words followed me. The kids giggled over their phones, their elbows knocking into cups of soda. I kept my posture straight, hands folded, eyes lowered just enough to look polite. The waiter brought bread. My sister-in-law reached across me without asking. My father-in-law commented on the wine. It was all so ordinary, but every ordinary detail only highlighted how misplaced I was. I remembered other nights. Thanksgiving when she told me to bring pie, but then announced she had baked everything herself. Christmas when she opened gifts and skipped mine like it had vanished. Birthdays when my name was never on the invitation, though I had done all the planning. Small moments, each one easy to excuse on its own. But together, they built a mountain I had been carrying silently. Tonight she placed the final stone on top. I tried to eat, though every bite tasted like paper. I tried to laugh at jokes that weren't funny. My husband touched my arm once under the table, a silent attempt at comfort. But he didn't defend me. He never did. His mother's shadow stretched too long, and he had spent his whole life standing inside it. The meal dragged on. Courses arrived and disappeared. Plates clattered, wine bottles emptied. I waited, quiet, patient, as though endurance was my only gift to myself. But inside, I was making calculations. I thought about the way she had laughed when she said I belonged with the children. The way she looked at me as if I were nothing but a guest who had overstayed her welcome. By the time dessert was offered, I had decided. I would not leave the restaurant carrying humiliation again. If she wanted to turn me into a joke, I would make sure the punchline belonged to me. When the waiter finally placed the leather folder on the table, I watched her. She reached for it with the confidence of someone who expected gratitude, maybe applause. She wanted to show she could handle the bill, that she was generous. But her hand trembled slightly when she flipped it open. I saw the moment her smile froze, the moment her eyes darted across the numbers she did not understand. I had arranged it earlier with the server. Every dish, every glass of wine, every side of asparagus dripping in butter was under her name. She had insisted I sit with the kids. She had insisted I was small. Now the paper in her hands told a different story. The room seemed to still for a beat. My sister-in-law frowned. My father-in-law leaned closer. The chatter dulled into awkward silence. I lifted my glass of water and took a slow sip, letting the tension stretch. Her voice broke the silence, thin and sharp. "This must be a mistake." She waved the waiter back, her bracelets jingling too loudly. The waiter kept his expression neutral, almost professional, but I caught the flicker of a smirk before he bowed slightly and said, "No mistake, ma'am. It is charged to you." The words hung heavy. She looked at me then, eyes narrow, mouth tight. I did not flinch. I only tilted my head, the same way she had tilted hers earlier, mocking and sweet. My husband shifted uncomfortably, his napkin twisting in his lap. The children looked up from their sodas, finally noticing the tension. My sister-in-law's fork clinked against her plate. I let the silence breathe, heavy and undeniable. For the first time all night, she could not laugh. The silence after the waiter's words felt like a heavy curtain falling over the table. Forks rested midair, glasses lingered in half-raised hands, and even the children grew quiet. My mother-in-law's face hardened as she flipped through the bill once more, her red nails tapping against the paper. She was waiting for someone to speak, to rescue her. No one did. I stayed still, my glass of water reflecting the flicker of candlelight. Inside, my heart was pounding fast, but I controlled my breath. I had lived long enough in her house of little humiliations to know that silence could be louder than words. Finally, she tried again, her tone sharp and commanding. "This is wrong. There is no way all of this is mine." She shoved the bill toward the waiter, as if her force alone could change numbers printed in ink. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes but the patience of someone who had seen it all, simply repeated, "No mistake, ma'am." His voice was steady, respectful, but there was no room for argument. My father-in-law cleared his throat, muttering something about checking the math, but he did not reach for his wallet. He sat back, watching, waiting to see how it would play out. My sister-in-law leaned close to her husband and whispered nervously, their eyes darting to me and then away. I folded my napkin carefully, smoothing the fabric as if I were simply preparing to leave. My mother-in-law's eyes caught mine. There was a flash of something in them, anger, fear, disbelief. She had spent years placing me at the edge of her world, seating me at corners, dismissing me with smiles that cut sharper than knives. Now she realized I was not simply going to absorb it. "Did you do this?" she hissed across the table. I raised my eyebrows slightly, not confirming, not denying. I let the question hang between us like smoke. The weight of my calmness only unsettled her further. She slammed the bill closed, her bracelets clattering against the table. "You think this is funny?" she demanded. I tilted my head and replied evenly, "I think it is fair." The words were soft, but they carried. People at the next table looked over. My husband shifted uncomfortably, but I did not waver. She barked a laugh that sounded nothing like humor. "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" She gestured wildly at the table, at the wine bottles now empty, at the plates scraped clean. "We invited you here, gave you a seat, and this is how you repay us?" I almost smiled. "A seat, yes. At the kids' table." "You invited me," I said quietly, "but you never welcomed me." The truth of it slipped into the air like a blade. No one at the table argued. They all knew. They had all seen the little ways she pushed me aside. Her face flushed deep red, the color of someone cornered. She tried to laugh again, but it came out broken. "It was a joke. You can't even take a joke?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. "Some jokes are just cruelty dressed in cheap laughter." The waiter still hovered, the bill in his hand. Patient but unrelenting, he would not leave until it was settled. My mother-in-law dug into her purse, snapping it open with too much force. She fumbled with her wallet, pulling out cards, muttering under her breath. Every motion was stiff, jerky, stripped of the elegance she always tried to wear like armor. The others pretended to be busy. My sister-in-law sipped her drink, though the glass was empty. My father-in-law stared at his phone. The children whispered nervously, sensing the storm but not understanding it. I sat still, breathing deeply, memorizing every second. This was not revenge in the petty sense. This was balance. She had written the rules of humiliation for years, and tonight she had to live by them. When the waiter walked away to run her card, she finally looked at me again. Her voice dropped low, venomous. "You think this makes you part of the family? You think this wins you respect?" I met her eyes, unblinking. "I don't need your definition of family. And respect? That is something you lost long before tonight." Her mouth opened to retort, but no words came. She turned away, pretending to adjust her napkin, pretending she still had control. The card machine beeped faintly from across the room. A moment later, the waiter returned with the receipt. He placed it gently in front of her. She scribbled her signature with a trembling hand, then shoved the pen back like it had burned her. Conversation resumed in stilted bursts, forced laughter, shallow remarks about dessert. But the energy had shifted. No one could erase what had just happened. I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed it, but because I wanted the walk. I wanted the pause, the space to breathe in my own power. As I stood at the sink, washing my hands slowly, I looked at my reflection. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright, alive in a way they hadn't been in years. When I returned to the table, she refused to meet my eyes. She busied herself with her purse, adjusting, zipping, unzipping, as though organization could distract her from the humiliation. My husband reached for my hand under the table. His palm was warm, hesitant. I let him hold it, but I did not look at him. Tonight was not about him. Finally, coats were gathered, chairs pushed back, and the family trickled toward the door. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain. My mother-in-law walked ahead, her shoulders stiff, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. As we reached the parking lot, she paused and turned suddenly, her face a mask of strained composure. "This is not over," she said, her voice brittle. I smiled faintly, not mocking, not cruel, just certain. "No," I replied. "It is only beginning." "Oh?" She blinked at me, unprepared for my calmness, then turned away quickly, sliding into her car. The door slammed, the engine roared, and they were gone. I stood under the streetlight for a long moment, my breath visible in the cool air. My husband hovered near me, unsure whether to speak. I didn't offer him words. I was not ready to return to silence. Tonight I had broken it, and I intended to keep breaking it. The restaurant behind me glowed with warm light, laughter spilling from new groups who had no idea what had just unfolded inside. To them, it was just another evening. To me, it was a line in the sand. I got into our car, my body finally relaxing into the seat. My hands trembled a little, but not from fear, from release. From the knowledge that I had taken back something that had been stolen from me piece by piece at every family gathering. As we drove away, I watched the lights shrink in the rearview mirror. A weight had shifted. The night was quiet, but inside, I felt the storm had only just begun. The ride home was a long silence broken only by the hum of the engine. My husband kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but I could feel the weight of everything he wanted to say pressing against the glass between us. He cleared his throat once, then again, as if rehearsing the opening of a sentence. I stared out the window, watching the city blur into streaks of neon and shadow. Finally, he spoke, soft and hesitant. "You didn't have to do that." I turned my head slowly, my voice calm. "Didn't have to, or shouldn't have?" He gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles pale. "She is still my mother." The words dropped between us like a stone in water. I let them ripple out before answering. "And I am still your wife. Which one matters more to you when she humiliates me in front of everyone?" He did not reply. The silence returned, heavier now, thick with guilt and truth. I leaned back against the seat, my heart steady. For the first time, I was not trembling after one of her attacks. I was in control. When we pulled into our driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically. The house looked the same as always, but it felt different. I stepped inside first, slipping off my shoes, my body humming with restless energy. I did not feel like sleeping. I needed space to breathe, to let the night settle into memory. My phone buzzed before I could even hang up my coat. A message lit the screen, her name flashing like a warning. I opened it. "You embarrassed this family tonight. You embarrassed yourself most of all. We will talk tomorrow." No greeting, no attempt at civility. Just venom poured into digital letters. I stared at it for a long moment before setting the phone down. I would not give her the satisfaction of a reply. Instead, I made tea. The hiss of the kettle, the rising steam, the scent of chamomile grounded me. My husband hovered nearby, pacing the kitchen. He opened his mouth twice, but when I raised my eyes to him, he shut it again. When the tea was ready, I carried the cup to the living room and curled into the corner of the couch. The first sip burned my tongue, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was alive, not a ghost seated at some corner table. I thought of the look on her face when she signed that bill. The way her laughter crumbled, the way the others avoided her eyes. For years, she had orchestrated my humiliation. Tonight, she had tasted her own recipe. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This time longer. "You are tearing this family apart. Do you realize how much damage you've caused?" People are already talking. My friends were at the restaurant. They saw everything. You made me look like a fool. I smiled into my cup. She did not realize the irony. She had done that to herself long before I lifted a finger. But the messages kept coming. Short, sharp bursts. You owe us an apology. You will regret this. Do not think you can turn my son against me. I muted the conversation. My chest felt lighter instantly. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the tea spread through me. Later that night, when the house was quiet and my husband finally retreated to bed, I stayed awake. My thoughts were a carousel, circling back through years of smaller wounds that had brought me here. The wedding when she told the photographer to crop me out of the family photo. The Christmas when she gave everyone personalized gifts but handed me a plain mug with no name. The vacation she forgot to include me in, sending the group message after the plane had already landed. Each moment had been tiny, deniable, easy for her to dismiss as oversights or jokes, but together they were a pattern, a blueprint of exclusion. Tonight was the first time I had held up a mirror and forced her to look at it. The next morning, I woke to more messages. Not just from her, but from my sister-in-law and even my father-in-law. Some scolding, some pleading, some wrapped in false concern. You went too far. Can't you just let things go? She is older, you should respect her. I deleted none of them. I saved every word. Evidence, proof. Because deep down, I knew this was not the end. She would not let it be. People like her never admit defeat. They regroup. They sharpen their knives. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window as the neighborhood stirred to life. Children biked down the street. A dog barked. The mail truck rumbled by. Normal life moved on, but I felt a storm gathering. By noon, the phone rang. Not a message this time. A call, her name flashing again. I let it ring out. Seconds later, my voicemail chimed. I pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen, brittle and high. You are ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, you spit in our faces. If you think you can shame me, you have another thing coming. I will not forget this. Oh. I set the phone down and let her words hang in the air. Then I exhaled slowly and whispered to myself, good. Because now she knew. I was no longer the quiet daughter-in-law she could dismiss. I was someone willing to draw lines, even if it cut through the heart of her empire. When my husband came downstairs, his eyes tired, I showed him the messages. He skimmed them, his jaw tightening. She will never forgive this, he said. Neither will I answered. For the first time, he did not argue. He sat beside me, silent, as if finally realizing that neutrality was no longer an option. That evening, a knock echoed through the house. Sharp, deliberate, not friendly. I opened the door to find my mother-in-law standing there, her lips pressed tight, her eyes blazing. Behind her stood my sister-in-law, arms crossed, and my father-in-law grim-faced. They had come as a unit, a family front. I held the door wide, my smile cool. Come in, I said. The battle was moving to my ground now. They entered my living room like they owned the place. My mother-in-law stepped in first, her heels striking the floor with sharp authority. My sister-in-law followed, clutching her purse tightly, while my father-in-law closed the door without asking permission. The air shifted immediately, thick with tension. My husband hovered behind me, torn between loyalty to them and the quiet realization that I was no longer going to bow. My mother-in-law sat down on the couch as if it belonged to her. She didn't even wait for me to offer. She smoothed her skirt, fixed her eyes on me, and began. You humiliated me in public, in front of family, in front of friends. That is not something I will forgive. I stayed standing. I wanted her to feel the imbalance, to look up at me for once. What I did, I said evenly, was reflect what you have been doing to me for years. The only difference is that this time, everyone saw it. Her eyes narrowed. My sister-in-law gasped softly, then looked down at her lap. My father-in-law folded his arms and muttered, This is not how families should behave. I turned toward him. You're right. Families should not behave this way, but she has made it the standard. My mother-in-law slammed her palm against the armrest. Enough. You come into this family with nothing, no status, no history, and now you dare to challenge me? The words cut, but not the way she intended. I had heard them before, in different forms, every time she reminded me that I was not born into their name, every time she tried to reduce me to nothing more than a guest. Tonight, I felt no sting, only clarity. I stepped closer. I challenged you because you pushed me too far. You thought I would never stand up. You were wrong. Her face flushed. My husband finally moved, stepping between us. Mom, stop, he said quietly. His voice trembled, but the words were there. For the first time, he told her to stop. She ignored him. Her gaze locked on me like I was prey. Do you know what people are saying about me after last night? Do you know how it feels to be laughed at? To be whispered about? I felt my lips curve into something that was not quite a smile. Yes, I said. I know exactly how it feels. Because you have made me live it at every dinner, every holiday, every gathering. The only difference is that now the laughter was aimed at you. Ugh! Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. My words had landed where they needed to. My sister-in-law finally spoke, her voice timid. Maybe we can just forget it. Move on. I turned to her, softening my tone. You have watched her do this to me. You laughed with her. You stayed silent. Moving on only works if the damage stops. Has it ever stopped? She dropped her eyes, unable to answer. My father-in-law shifted in his seat, his face red. You think you can break this family apart? You think you can turn us against each other? I shook my head. I don't need to turn anyone. The cracks were already there. I am simply done pretending they don't exist. My mother-in-law rose from the couch, her voice trembling with rage. You will regret this. You are nothing without us. I met her glare. My voice was calm, measured. If being part of your family means being treated like less than human, then I would rather be nothing. Oh! The words hung heavy. My husband's face went pale. My sister-in-law covered her mouth. My father-in-law cursed under his breath. But I did not flinch. She stepped closer, so close I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the crack in her lipstick. You don't get to win, she whispered. I leaned in slightly. I already did. Last night, when the whole room saw you for who you are. Her hand twitched, as if she wanted to slap me, but she stopped herself. Maybe because my husband was watching. Maybe because even she knew that would be crossing a line she could not defend. The silence stretched until finally my father-in-law spoke again. We should go. His voice was tight, controlled. He knew they had lost ground here. My mother-in-law grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and angry. She stormed toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. My sister-in-law trailed after her, her eyes still downcast. My father-in-law lingered a moment, his gaze heavy on me, before he followed. The door shut with a thud. The house was quiet again, except for the sound of my own breathing. My husband turned to me, his face pale and conflicted. I don't know what happens now, he admitted. I looked at him, steady. Now, she knows I am not afraid. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For years he had lived between us, trying to keep peace, trying to pretend loyalty to both sides was possible. Tonight he saw it wasn't. Tonight he saw me draw a line that could not be erased. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see their car reverse out of the driveway. Her face was lit by the dashboard, twisted with fury. Even from this distance, I could feel her vow. She would not let this end here. But neither would I. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because the war was over, but because I had finally chosen to fight it on my own terms. I closed the curtain, turned off the lights, and let the house sink into darkness. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the battle had only just begun. The next morning began deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and for a moment, I almost believed the storm had passed. My husband sat across from me, staring into his mug, as though answers might swirl in the dark liquid. Neither of us spoke. The silence was not comfortable, but it was steadier than the night before. Then my phone lit up. First one message, then another, then a flood. Group texts from his family, each one sharper than the last. You went too far. You've embarrassed us all. You'll apologize, or you'll regret it. I scrolled without replying, my chest tight but my face calm. They were rallying together now, trying to regain control. The irony was almost laughable. For years they ignored me. But the moment I stood tall, suddenly I was important enough to attack. My husband glanced up, his eyes weary. Maybe if you just talk to her. I cut him off gently. Talk to her? That's all I've ever done. Talking only gave her more chances to twist the knife. He lowered his gaze again, saying nothing more. By noon, the phone buzzed with a new number. I answered out of instinct. A clipped female voice introduced herself as the manager of the restaurant. My pulse quickened. Your mother-in-law has disputed the charges, she said flatly. She claims she was targeted unfairly, that the check was altered. We're reviewing the receipts and server notes. I closed my eyes. Of course. She could not simply accept defeat. She needed to rewrite the story, to paint herself as the victim once again. Do you need my statement? I asked. Yes, the manager replied. The server mentioned that you gave specific instructions about the bill. He wrote it down. We just need to confirm. I exhaled slowly. Yes, that was me. And it was intentional. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. I figured as much. Honestly, I admire it. Don't worry. We'll handle her. When I hung up, my husband stared at me in disbelief. You admitted it? Yes, I said firmly. Because I'm done hiding. Bye. The rest of the day unfolded like a siege. More messages poured in, some demanding, others pleading. My sister-in-law tried to appeal to guilt. She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean harm. My father-in-law sent one line dripping with threat. This family will not tolerate betrayal. But it was my mother-in-law's message that cut through all of them. You've declared war. Don't cry when you lose. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. War. The word rolled through me, both terrifying and liberating. She finally named what had always been happening. At least now it was honest. That evening, my husband's aunt called. She spoke in a hushed tone, as though she were sneaking loyalty across enemy lines. I shouldn't say this, but your mother-in-law is telling everyone you stole from her, that you humiliated her out of jealousy. She's spreading it through the whole family. The lie did not surprise me. The speed of it did. She was a master of control, and this was her counterattack. If she couldn't silence me, she would smear me. Thank you for telling me, I said. My voice was calm, but my stomach churned. After I hung up, I sat at the table, staring at the wall. My husband hovered in the doorway, torn as always. What do we do now? He asked. I turned to him slowly. Now we show her that I won't break. If she wants a war, she'll get one. The next morning, I took steps she would not expect. I gathered the messages, the voicemails, even the restaurant's confirmation. I organized everything into folders on my laptop. Evidence. Not because I planned to use it immediately, but because I wanted to be ready. By afternoon, she escalated again. A knock rattled the door. When I opened it, 2 neighbors stood there, awkward expressions on their faces. We just wanted to check in, one said. We heard some things. About last night. My chest tightened. Already she was turning the neighborhood into her jury. Already she was crafting the story where I was the villain. I invited them in, served coffee, and calmly told the truth. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I simply explained that for years she had treated me like less than family, and that last night was the first time I pushed back. By the time they left, their faces had softened. They promised to keep an open mind. Small victories. But I knew she would not stop there. She thrived on dominance, and I had stripped it from her in public. Her pride demanded retaliation. That night, another call came. This time it was from her directly. Her voice was cold, calculated. You think you humiliated me, but you humiliated yourself. This family will never accept you now. You're finished. I let the silence stretch before answering. Maybe that's the best thing that's ever happened to me. She hung up instantly. I sat in the quiet house, the clock ticking loudly, the shadows stretching across the floor. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From adrenaline, from knowing the battle was no longer hidden. When I finally went to bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I knew tomorrow would bring new tactics, new lies, new attempts to crush me. But I also knew something else. I was no longer the silent daughter-in-law at the kids' table. I was the woman who made her freeze. Days turned into a week. and the storm did not pass. My phone remained heavy with unanswered messages, calls from relatives I barely knew, and screenshots from friends who whispered that my mother-in-law was telling everyone I was unstable. She said I was bitter, jealous, desperate for attention. She painted herself as the victim of a cruel plot. At first the words stung. I wondered if people would believe her, but then I remembered how many times she had made me invisible. Now she was forced to say my name out loud. Even if it was with venom, she could no longer erase me. My husband lived in a fog of guilt. He spent long hours at work, avoiding both her calls and my questions. At night, he sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. I wanted him to choose, to declare where he stood, but I no longer begged for his loyalty. I had chosen myself, and that choice did not depend on him. One evening, just as the sky turned violet, there was another knock at the door. I opened it to find my mother-in-law standing there alone. No entourage, no family shield. Her hair was pinned back too tightly, her lipstick smudged at the corners. She looked smaller somehow, though her eyes still burned with fire. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was brittle, almost breaking. I let her in. She stood in the living room, glancing around as if searching for weaknesses in the walls. Finally, she turned to me. "You have ruined everything. My reputation, my family dinners, my son's peace. Are you proud of yourself?" I crossed my arms, steady. "I'm proud I finally stood up, that's all." She sneered, but the edge faltered. "You think people respect you now? They pity you. They laugh behind your back." I shook my head. "They've been laughing at me for years. The difference is, now they know why." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked away, staring at a family photo on the wall, one of the few where I had been included. Her reflection in the glass looked older, weary. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "You don't belong here." I took a breath. My voice was calm, final. "Maybe not in your family, but I belong in my own life. And I won't let you take that from me anymore." She turned sharply, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. Her heels clicked faster this time, less certain, almost unsteady. She paused with her hand on the knob and spat out one last sentence. "This isn't over." Then she was gone. I stood in the silence she left behind, my chest rising and falling, my hands trembling only slightly. I realized then that it didn't matter if it was over for her. For me, it already was. The days that followed brought smaller ripples. Some relatives called to scold me, others to quietly admit they had seen her cruelty too. One aunt whispered, "I wish I had your courage." Another cousin messaged, "She's finally met her match." The balance of power had shifted, even if no one said it outright. My husband eventually asked, "So what happens now?" His eyes were tired, but softer than before. I smiled faintly. "Now we live, with or without them." I began to rebuild small things that had been lost under her shadow. Dinner with friends who valued me. A weekend trip of my own choosing. Laughter that came without effort. Slowly, I remembered who I was before her voice filled every room. But there were reminders. A glance from neighbors who had heard her side. A strained silence at the grocery store when we crossed paths. She still moved through the world like a queen stripped of her crown, trying to command loyalty from people who no longer bowed. One night, as I folded laundry, I caught myself smiling, not because everything was perfect, but because for once I felt free. I had stopped waiting for her approval, stopped chasing a seat at her table. The irony was sharp. She had laughed and told me to sit with the children. In the end, it was she who was reduced to tantrums and whispered campaigns, frozen in the glare of her own making. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the stars push through the dark. The air was cool, the night still. For the first time in years, I did not dread the next family event, the next cutting remark. Whatever came, I knew I could face it. Because I had already faced her. And I had not broken. Maybe she would keep fighting. Maybe she would never forgive. Maybe the war between us would flicker on for years. But I had drawn my line. And standing on this side of it, I felt stronger than I ever had. I leaned back, sipping slowly, letting the quiet wrap around me. Somewhere, perhaps, She was still seething, still plotting, but that was her burden to carry. Mine was lighter now, and as I sat there, free at last from the weight of her approval, one thought lingered in my mind. I didn't know if she realized it yet, but that night at the restaurant, when she froze with the bill in her hand, she lost more than money. She lost me. And maybe, just maybe, she lost the only power she ever truly had.